The road into the valley stretched endlessly before Claire Bennett, a ribbon of dusty orange cutting across the quiet western landscape. Her old truck rattled over every bump, as if protesting the journey as much as she secretly did. She kept one hand on the wheel, the other drumming anxiously against her thigh. She had taken assignments in remote places before, but something about this valley felt different. Too peaceful, too still, almost like it was waiting for her. She tried not to think about that. The wind pushed through her half-open window, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth and wild sage. Claire inhaled deeply, letting the dry air settle her nerves. She had promised herself that this would just be another temporary job. A few weeks of veterinary work, a few nights in some quiet rented room, and then she'd move on, just as she always did. Staying in one place too long never ended well. Staying meant people asked questions. Staying meant getting attached. Staying meant risking the kind of pain she had already lived through once. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "Don't think about that," she whispered to herself. The valley widened as she drove deeper into it, revealing rolling golden fields and distant mountains rising like blue shadows on the horizon. She could see cattle grazing far off, tiny shapes moving lazily in the warmth of the late afternoon sun. Her destination finally came into view. A sprawling ranch spread across acres of open land with white-fenced pastures and a sturdy farmhouse framed by tall cottonwoods. A large wooden sign read, "Boone Ranch, established 1989. Claire slowed the truck and exhaled. The place looked peaceful. Too peaceful for someone like her. She pulled onto the gravel driveway, dust swirling in the air behind her. As she stepped out, the heat embraced her, along with the sound of distant laughter, children's laughter. She turned, spotting two small figures racing each other toward the barn. The sight tugged unexpectedly at her chest. She wasn't ready for that kind of feeling. Before she could gather her thoughts, a deep voice called out, "You must be the doctor." Claire turned sharply. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood near the corral, wiping his hands on a rag. His beard was flecked with silver, his hair sun-bleached at the tips, and his posture relaxed in a way that only came from decades of working the land. He was older than she expected. Late 50s, maybe. But there was nothing frail about him. He carried a steady warmth, the kind that reached his eyes before his smile even formed. "You're Claire, right?" he asked. She nodded. "Claire Bennett, traveling vet from the regional program." He approached, extending a calloused hand. Claire braced herself for one of those bone-crushing rancher handshakes she had encountered 100 times before. Instead, his grip was firm but surprisingly gentle. "Elias Boone," he said, "welcome to my little corner of the world." Little was not the word she would have used. The ranch stretched out like its own kingdom. She released his hand, a flicker of unexpected tension running through her chest. "Thank you for having me. I heard you were dealing with some livestock issues." Elias nodded. "Cattle have been showing signs of infection. I figured it was time someone smarter than me took a look." She smiled, despite herself. "I'll do my best." Before they could say more, a blur of movement rushed toward them. Two young kids, no older than 8 or 9, skidded to a halt in front of them. One had straw-colored hair sticking up in every direction. The other wore boots 2 sizes too big. "Is this the vet?" the straw-haired boy asked with wide eyes. Elias chuckled. "Sure is." "Like a real one?" the other boy whispered, staring at Claire as if she were a celebrity. Claire crouched down with a warm smile. "Last time I checked." The boys exploded into excited chatter, rattling off every animal they hoped she could help. Claire listened patiently, nodding along, something soft stirring inside her. She wasn't used to being welcomed with this kind of enthusiasm. As the kids ran off again, Elias cleared his throat. "Those two are the youngest of the bunch. The rest show up around dinner if they're not out working." "Your kids?" Claire asked. "My adopted troublemakers?" he said proudly. 7 in total. You'll meet them all soon." 7. She tried not to let the number intimidate her. Elias gestured toward the cattle fields. "If you're up for it, we can start looking at the herd." She nodded, and the two of them walked side by side toward the grazing area. The sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the faint lowing of cattle filled the air. Claire fell into her professional rhythm, examining the animals with practiced hands, asking questions and taking notes. Elias watched her with quiet interest, occasionally offering information or steadying an uncooperative cow. Their shoulders brushed once, lightly, unintentionally, but enough for Claire to notice a flush rise to her cheeks. "You're good at this," Elias said softly as she finished checking the last animal. "It's my job," she replied, trying to hide the warmth in her voice. "It's more than that," he said. "Some people fix animals. You care for them." She looked away. Compliments always hit her strangely, like she wasn't sure she deserved them. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky shades of amber and rose. When they returned to the house, the sound of laughter spilled from the open windows. Inside, the dining table was crowded with kids, some teens, some younger, talking over one another as plates of food passed around. Someone yelled, "The vet is here!" The entire table turned to look at her. Elias leaned in slightly. "Don't worry, they're loud, but they're harmless." She wasn't worried, she was overwhelmed, but in a strangely comforting way. Throughout dinner, she found herself laughing more than she expected. The Boone kids had endless stories, and Elias watched them with an easy fondness that made something in Claire's chest ache in a bittersweet way. She caught him looking at her once or twice, not with judgment, but curiosity, like he was already trying to understand who she really was. After the meal, she lingered by the kitchen doorway, watching Elias gently help the younger ones wash their hands and get ready for bed. The sight warmed her more than she cared to admit. Later, when the house quieted, she stepped outside to the porch. Night had settled over the valley, and crickets filled the air with their steady rhythm. She wrapped her arms around herself and exhaled slowly. She hadn't felt this kind of peace in years. The ranch, the laughter, Elias's calm presence, it all felt dangerously comforting. Too comforting. "Don't get attached," she murmured into the dark. "This isn't home." It never is. Yet deep down, she wasn't sure she believed her own words. The sun rose early over the Boone Ranch, breaking through Claire's thin curtains and painting soft gold across the small guest room. She blinked awake to the distant sound of roosters, hooves thudding against the ground, and laughter from somewhere outside. It took her a moment to remember where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling and faint smell of pine wood, reminding her that she wasn't in one of her usual cramped motel rooms. This place was quieter, safer. Too safe. She forced herself out of bed, tying her hair back as she glanced at her reflection. Her eyes looked less tired than usual. That alone unsettled her. Outside, the morning air was cool, crisp enough to sting her cheeks. She stepped off the porch and spotted Elias already working near the barn. He moved with the ease of someone who had been awake long before dawn, lifting bales of hay as if they weighed nothing. The moment he noticed her, he raised a hand in greeting. "Mornin', Dr. Bennett," he called with a grin. She huffed a laugh under her breath. "You know you can just call me Claire." He teased. "I'll think about it." She approached him, adjusting her sleeves. "What can I help with?" "Well," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans, "we usually start by feeding the animals. Simple stuff, easy enough for even a city vet." She narrowed her eyes playfully. "I'm not from the city." "Close enough," he replied. He led her through the morning routine. She learned how the Boone family rotated chores, how each child had a responsibility. The rhythm of it all felt almost like a dance, everyone moving with instinctive understanding of the ranch's needs. Claire tried to mimic their ease, though she nearly tripped over a feed bucket twice. Elias chuckled both times, stepping in just before she fell. "You're doing fine," he said, steadying her by the elbow. "Takes time to learn the flow around here." She tried to ignore the warmth that lingered where his hand had been. After the initial chores, Elias saddled up one of the calmer horses and handed the reins to her. "You said you've ridden before," he said. "Let's see if you remember how." She mounted slowly, feeling the animal shift beneath her. Riding had never been her strong point in vet school. She knew the anatomy, the health, the biology, but sitting on top of a horse was another matter entirely. The horse snorted, turning its head slightly to look at her as if judging her confidence. "Don't look at me like that," she muttered. Elias laughed. "Talkin' to him already, that's a good sign." She followed Elias across the field, gripping the reins a little too tightly. The morning sun warmed her back as they rode. and the sound of hooves against grass blended with the low hum of insects awakening for the day. Elias rode slightly ahead, glancing back at her occasionally. "You're holding your breath," he pointed out. "No, I'm not." "You are. Relax your shoulders." She tried. It didn't work. Elias slowed his horse until they were side by side, then reached over to lightly nudge her elbow. "Like this," he said gently. "Loosen up. The horse feels everything you do, with effort and a few deep breaths." She softened her posture. The horse responded instantly, settling into a smoother gait. A small smile tugged at her lips. "See?" Elias said. "Told you you'd be fine." They rode along the fence line, checking on the cattle and talking about the valley. Elias told her about the flood a decade ago, the drought 2 years after that, and the odd miracle of a calf born perfectly healthy during a lightning storm. Claire found herself laughing more than she should have, not because his stories were extraordinary, but because the way he told them made even the ordinary feel warm. For a moment, she let herself enjoy it. But moments like that were dangerous. When they returned to the ranch house, a group of the Boone kids were waiting near the barn. One of the teenagers, a girl with long braids and a skeptical glare, studied Claire closely. "So this is the vet Dad keeps talking about," she said. Elias raised an eyebrow. "I talk about a lot of things, Anna. Not like that." Anna shot back with a smirk. Claire felt her face warm, but she forced a polite smile. "Nice to meet you." Anna crossed her arms. "Dad says you're fixing the cows. The neighbors said you're smart. I guess that's good." Claire blinked. Thank you?" The younger kids burst into laughter. One of the boys tugged on Claire's sleeve. "Don't mind Anna, she scares everyone." "I do not," Anna snapped, but even she couldn't hide her grin. The children began firing questions at Claire again, about horses, sick pets, and whether she ever saw a wolf up close. She answered as many as she could, gently shooing them away only when Elias insisted she needed a break. He guided her toward the barn where the older cattle were kept. "Let's see how the herd is doing," he said. They worked side by side for hours. The cattle showed signs of improvement, though a few still needed treatment. Claire moved with confidence, injecting antibiotics, cleaning small wounds, and making notes. Elias handled the animals with surprising gentleness, calming them with his voice. At one point, a stubborn cow jerked suddenly, knocking Claire off balance. Elias caught her around the waist before she hit the ground. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. His hands were warm, his breath steady on the back of her neck. "You okay?" he asked softly. She forced herself to step back. "I'm fine, thank you." He didn't press, but his eyes followed her a moment longer than necessary. By the time the sun began its slow descent, they were exhausted and covered in dust. Dinner that night was louder than the last. The Boone kids told stories about school and chores, bickering and laughing over each other. Claire found herself slipping into the noise easily, joking with the younger ones, listening intently to the older ones. Elias sat at the head of the table, watching his children with quiet pride. When his gaze drifted toward Claire, their eyes met, and an unspoken warmth passed between them. She looked away quickly. After dinner, the house hummed with the sounds of dishes clattering and children arguing over who was supposed to take out the trash. Claire leaned against the doorway, watching as Elias guided the youngest two to the bathroom sink. "Soap," he reminded gently. "Not water. Soap." One of them giggled. "Soap tastes weird. You're not supposed to eat it." Claire covered her mouth, laughing quietly. Elias glanced up and caught her watching. Instead of looking away, he smiled, a soft, knowing smile that made her feel strangely seen. Later, when the house finally quieted, Claire stepped outside again. The porch light flickered softly, casting warm shadows across the wooden boards. The sky above was a blanket of stars, clearer than anything she had seen in months. The scent of hay lingered in the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of wildflowers carried by the breeze. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the cool night air slip under her sleeves. The ranch behind her buzzed with quiet comfort, voices murmuring upstairs, footsteps crossing the hallway, a door closing softly. She felt strangely pulled into it all, as if this place had been woven around her like a warm blanket. But she knew better. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, This is temporary. Still, even as she said it, the heaviness in her chest told her she wasn't sure how temporary it would be. The valley felt too peaceful, the children too welcoming, Elias too steady, too warm, too something she didn't have the courage to name. She tried to convince herself she wasn't settling in, that she wasn't beginning to care about the way Elias smiled at her, the way the children clung to her words, the way the ranch already felt too close to home. But she could feel it happening. The valley was getting under her skin. And so was he. The next few days passed in an unsettling mixture of peace and tension, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. Claire tried to slip into her usual routine of keeping emotional distance, telling herself that if she stayed focused on work, her heart wouldn't get tangled. But the Boone Ranch made that nearly impossible. Everywhere she turned, someone was calling her name, asking her opinion, pulling her into their daily rhythm as if she'd always belonged there. And then there was Elias. He had a way of simply being present, never demanding her attention, yet somehow always there when she needed him. Whether he was fixing a fence, checking water lines, or leading the younger kids through their chores, he carried a quiet steadiness that drew her in more than she wanted to admit. It was late afternoon when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stepped away from the barn, brushing dirt from her sleeves before answering. A familiar voice spoke on the other end. "Dr. Bennett, we've been trying to reach you. We received your application. Are you still interested in the position?" Claire's stomach dropped. She had almost forgotten about the city clinic, the one she'd applied to months ago, on a restless night when she convinced herself she needed a change. The job promised security, stability, and a predictable schedule, everything she had told herself she needed. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'm still here. We'd like to offer you a full-time position," the woman continued. "Competitive salary, benefits, housing stipend. We'd appreciate an answer soon. We think you'd be an excellent addition to the team." Claire swallowed. Her eyes drifted toward the ranch house where the faint laughter of children spilled into the yard. "Can I have a day to think about it?" "Of course," the woman replied. "But we need your decision quickly." When the call ended, Claire stood still for a long moment, the phone heavy in her hand. A cold wind swept across the field, brushing through her hair like a warning. "You should go," she told herself. "This is what you wanted. A normal life. A safe life. A life without questions." But the thought of leaving made her chest tighten painfully. She turned back toward the barn. Elias was standing in the doorway, watching her with that quiet gaze of his. He didn't ask what the call was about, but something in her expression must have given it away. "You okay?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Just work stuff." He nodded gently. "Well, whenever you're ready. The calves in Pen 3 need their shots." He walked past her, giving her an easy smile that almost undid her. She watched him go, her heart sinking deeper with each step. He didn't press her, didn't question her, didn't expect anything from her, but somehow that made everything harder. She joined him in the barn, trying to focus on the work. She moved with practiced efficiency, preparing syringes, checking temperatures, and recording notes. But her hands weren't as steady as usual, and she could feel Elias's eyes flicking toward her now and then. At one point, she dropped a medical clipboard. Papers scattered across the hay. She knelt to gather them, but her fingers trembled too much. Elias crouched beside her, gently lifting some of the sheets. "You're distracted," he said softly. "I'm fine," she muttered. He didn't push. He simply handed her the papers and stood again, giving her space. That small act of patience, so simple, so gentle, sent a painful warmth through her chest. She didn't want to feel this. She didn't want to care. Later, when they finished their work, she hurried outside to get some air. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in oranges and purple hues. The beauty of it only made her feel more trapped. She heard footsteps behind her. "You left your notebook in the barn," Elias said. He held it out to her, then paused when he saw how pale she looked. "Claire, talk to me." She shook her head quickly. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Her throat tightened. She could feel the pressure building, the fear, the shame, the truth she had carried alone for years. Elias waited patiently. that same steady calm in his eyes. "Elias," she whispered, her voice shaking, "there's something you need to know." He didn't move closer, didn't rush her, he just waited. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. "I got a job offer," she said. "A good one, in the city." He nodded slowly. "Do you want to take it?" "That's the thing," she said, swallowing hard. "I don't know. I should want to. It's everything I planned for, everything that makes sense." She shut her eyes. "But staying here scares me more." Elias frowned softly. "Why does it scare you?" Her breath hitched. For years she had buried the truth, wrapped it in silence, protected herself with distance. But Elias, he deserved honesty. He deserved to know why she could never be what he might want. "I can't." Her voice broke. "I can't have children." The words spilled out like a dam bursting. She felt her chest tighten with humiliation. She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear the pity she feared she'd see. "I can't give anyone a family. I can't be someone's future. So if you're thinking there could be something between us, you should know. I can't offer you that. I can't offer anyone that." She braced herself for rejection, for disappointment, for that familiar look she had seen in a past relationship, the one that told her she was less than, incomplete. But instead, Elias exhaled slowly, almost in relief. "Well," he said gently, "good." Her head jerked up, startled. "What?" He gave her a warm, quiet smile. "I've got enough kids for both of us." She blinked, stunned. "Elias, I don't think you understand. I can't." "I understand perfectly," he said. "I'm not looking for someone to give me more children. I already have 7. I'm looking for someone to share my life with, someone kind, someone steady, someone who cares about others more than herself." He paused, his voice softer. "Someone like you." Emotion hit her like a tidal wave. She turned away, unable to speak. Elias stepped closer, not invading her space, just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Claire," he said gently, "what happened to you? It doesn't change who you are, and it sure as hell doesn't make you unworthy of love." She covered her mouth as her eyes filled with tears she'd refused to shed for years. A trembling breath escaped her. "Elias, I didn't want to hurt you." He shook his head. "You didn't." He paused, voice dropping to a soft rumble. "But you are hurting yourself." She pressed her forehead against her hands, trying to compose herself. He didn't reach out, didn't offer false comfort. He just waited beside her, solid and patient, giving her space to breathe. Finally, she managed to speak. "I don't know what to do." "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said quietly. "Just stay, eat dinner, sit with us, laugh with the kids. You don't owe me a future right now. You don't owe me anything." His words were simple, but they unraveled something inside her. She had expected disappointment. Instead, she got acceptance. A soft breeze rolled across the valley. Claire wiped her eyes, breathing shakily. "You make things too easy," she whispered. Elias smiled. "Life's hard enough. No need to make it harder." They stood together in silence, the sky deepening into twilight. It wasn't a confession of love. It wasn't a promise. It was something gentler, something safer, yet somehow more powerful than either. And for the first time in years, Claire felt a weight lift from her heart. She didn't know what choice she would make. But she knew one thing for certain. Elias Boone didn't see her as broken. And that terrified her even more. The sky changed before anyone fully noticed it. One moment, the afternoon sun shone warm and steady over the ranch fields. And the next, a heavy gray shadow crawled across the valley like an animal stretching itself awake. The wind picked up sharply, sending the tops of the cottonwoods swaying, their leaves whispering warnings through the air. Claire stepped outside the barn, immediately sensing something was wrong. The air carried a thickness that didn't belong there, a damp pressure that made her ribs tighten. Elias stood at the edge of the field, his hat pulled low as he looked toward the horizon. Even from a distance, Claire could read the tension in his shoulders. "That's not a normal storm, is it?" she called, walking toward him. He shook his head. "Looks like the river might overflow again. We need to get the low-ground animals up on higher land before the rain hits hard." His calmness didn't hide the urgency threading beneath his voice. Claire didn't hesitate. She followed him to the barn where the Boone kids were already gathering, pulling on boots and jackets, their movements faster than their usual playful energy. "Everyone knows their job," Elias said, raising his voice over the wind. "Cattle first, horses next. Stay together. Don't go near the West Creek." Claire moved to help the children prepare, adjusting a little boy's raincoat hood and checking a girl's boots. Panic wasn't present yet, but worry hovered in the room like a dim light. "Do storms like this happen often?" Claire asked. "Not this strong," Elias said, "but the valley's tricky. When it rains up in the mountains, flash floods hit the lowlands fast." Before Claire could respond, a loud crack of thunder rolled over the ranch, so deep it felt like it shook the ground beneath them. The Boone kids exchanged uneasy looks. "All right," Elias clapped his hands once. "Move out!" Everyone scattered. Claire ran toward the cattle pens with two of the older boys. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes, and the first cold drops of rain stung her skin. By the time they reached the field, the sky had turned into a swirling mass of dark clouds. The cattle were restless, shifting nervously as the storm approached. Claire worked quickly, helping the boys guide them up the sloping path toward safer ground. The animals resisted at first, but fear eventually pushed them along. "Keep them moving!" Claire shouted. The rain thickened suddenly, turning the dirt under her boots into thick, slippery mud. Thunder cracked again, closer this time, and instinctively she ducked. Within minutes, they managed to get the herd moving. Claire pushed soaked hair from her face as she turned to help the boys follow Elias's next set of instructions. But something caught her attention, two voices shouting from across the yard. She turned sharply. Two of the younger Boone kids were running toward the west pasture, where the creek cut dangerously close to the fields. "No, no, no," Claire whispered under her breath. She sprinted after them, slipping on the wet grass, her heart pounding. "Wait! Stop!" she called. "You're not supposed to go there." The boys didn't hear her. They were trying to reach the horses grazing near the lower field, desperate to lead them to safety before the floodwaters rose. Claire's pulse roared in her ears. She ran harder, her breath sharp in her chest. The boys reached the horses, pulling at the reins with frantic movements, trying to guide the animals uphill. A pair of hands suddenly caught Claire's arm. "Claire!" Elias, voice cut through the wind. "What are you doing over here?" "The boys!" she gasped. "They're down by the creek!" Elias's expression shifted instantly. Fear flashed through his eyes. Not panic, but a fierce urgency fueled by experience. He grabbed his horse's reins and swung into the saddle. "Get on," he ordered. She didn't argue. He hauled her up behind him with one strong pull, and before she could settle, he kicked the horse into motion. They rode hard across the muddy field, rain slapping against their skin like ice. The horse's hooves splashed through growing puddles, and Claire wrapped her arms tightly around Elias's waist to keep from slipping. The closer they got to the creek, the louder the water roared, a violent rushing sound that drowned out everything else. The creek had swollen so fast it looked like a twisting brown ribbon tearing through the pasture. When they reached the boys, Claire's heart lurched. The youngest was already knee-deep in muddy water, trying to pull a frightened horse out of harm's way. The older boy clung to another horse's reins, struggling to stay upright as the wind pushed him sideways. Elias jumped off the horse before it had fully stopped. "Stay here," he shouted to Claire, though she knew he didn't expect her to listen. She didn't. The moment her boots hit the ground, she ran toward the younger boy, who slipped just as she reached him. She grabbed his arm before he went under, pulling him tight against her. The horse jolted forward in fear, knocking her sideways. Mud splashed across her coat as she fought to regain balance. "It's okay," she shouted over the raging wind. "We've got you." Elias reached the older boy, steadying him with one arm and gripping the horse's bridle with the other. His voice was low and steady, somehow calm despite the storm. The boy clung to him, eyes wide with fear. The water rose quickly, swirling around Claire's ankles. She tightened her hold on the younger child. "Claire!" Elias called. "Bring him over!" She pushed through the thick mud, the boy gripping her with shaking hands. Every step felt heavier, the ground slipping beneath her. A sudden surge of water rushed past, forcing her to brace herself. Elias reached out. She grabbed his hand, letting him pull both of them to firmer ground. "Good job," he said breathlessly. "Stay with them." He turned back to the horses. Together they coaxed the animals uphill, the four of them guiding them slowly, carefully, step by step. The rain poured harder, but the sight of the ranch house on higher ground fueled their determination. By the time they reached safety, Claire's arms were trembling, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The boys, soaked and muddy, clung to each other, shaken but safe. Elias looked at them with a mixture of fear and relief so raw it made Claire's chest tighten. Then he turned to her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her entire body was shaking. "You? Better now." He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. The warmth of it cut through the cold like a lifeline. She didn't pull away. When they walked back to the house, the other Boone kids rushed out, engulfing the younger boys in a flood of hugs and relieved cries. The storm still raged, but inside the house, warmth and safety waited. Claire followed Elias into the entryway, dripping water onto the wooden floor. He removed his jacket, hanging it on a hook, then turned to look at her. His eyes softened in a way that made her heart ache. "You didn't have to go after them," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Of course I did." He stepped closer, searching her face. "You were terrified, weren't you?" She let out a shaky laugh. "Are you kidding? I was terrified the entire time." "But you still went, and so did you," she whispered. For a moment, the storm outside felt very far away. Elias brushed a stray strand of wet hair from her cheek, his touch gentle and careful, as though he didn't want to startle her. "You're already part of this family," he said softly. Claire's breath caught. The words settled deep inside her, warm and unguarded, reaching places she hadn't let anyone touch in years. She blinked, tears threatening to spill, not from fear this time, but from something far more overwhelming. Acceptance. She stepped back slightly, afraid of how fast her heart was beating. "Elias, He didn't push her to finish. He simply nodded, understanding written all over his face. "That's enough for tonight," he said. "Get warm, rest." She watched him walk away, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the kitchen lights. The house hummed with relief and quiet gratitude. Claire felt it settle into her bones, into the parts of her she had spent so long trying to keep empty. As she stood there, still trembling from the storm, one thought echoed in her mind. She wasn't sure she could leave this place anymore. The morning after the storm was strangely quiet. The valley, usually alive with birdsong at sunrise, seemed to be resting from the chaos of the night before. Mist hovered low over the fields, softened by the early light. Claire stepped onto the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her body still sore from yesterday's frantic efforts. The memory of the cold water, the panic in the boys' eyes, the rush of adrenaline, it all lingered inside her like vibrations that hadn't yet settled. But beneath the exhaustion was something warmer, something steadier, something she couldn't ignore anymore. She watched as Elias emerged from the barn, his hat pulled low against the morning chill, a thermos of coffee in his hand. His steps were slower than usual, but still firm. He hadn't slept much. She could see it in the faint shadows beneath his eyes, but he carried the same quiet determination that defined him. When he reached the porch, he held out the thermos. "You look like you could use this." She accepted it gratefully. "You look like you could, too." He chuckled softly. "I'll survive." They stood side by side, looking out over the wet fields, watching the valley soak in the calm. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding. The front door creaked behind them, and two little Boone kids tumbled outside, giggling as they raced past. "Careful," Elias called after them. "Ground still slippery." "We know," one of them shouted back, almost slipping immediately. Claire laughed quietly. Elias turned to her, his expression softening. "They're going to talk about yesterday for weeks, but they're safe. That's what matters." A deep breath escaped her, slow and shaky. "They were brave." "But it could have gone so wrong," he nodded. "Storms teach us how fast things can change, but they also show us who steps up when it counts." She felt his gaze lingering on her. and her cheeks warmed. "I didn't do anything special." "You did," he said. "You didn't think twice. You just went." She looked down at her hands. The truth she didn't say was that she hadn't thought of herself at all. Just the boys. And maybe him. After a moment, he stepped off the porch, offering her a hand. "Come on, let's check on the horses." She took it. The horses were restless but unharmed, stamping nervously as they recovered from the night's fear. Claire moved among them with practiced gentleness, stroking their necks, whispering reassurances. Elias watched her quietly, occasionally adjusting a gait or patting a flank. The kids wandered around the barn, eager to help, but Claire gently directed them to quieter tasks, wanting them to rest after yesterday's ordeal. Throughout the day, small moments unfolded that pulled her deeper into the ranch's rhythm. The children clung to her a little more tightly when passing by, as if last night had stitched an invisible thread between them. The older kids nodded at her with a kind of respect she hadn't expected. The animals seemed calmer under her touch, and Elias stayed near, not hovering, but present in a way she felt more than saw. Every time she turned, he was there, handing her a rope, moving a bale of hay, or simply offering a soft look that made her heart lift and ache at the same time. By lunchtime, the sky had cleared completely. Sunlight spilled over the ranch, warming the mud into steam. The house buzzed with activity as the Boone kids gathered around the long wooden table. Claire found herself squeezed between two of the younger boys, who excitedly recounted their version of the storm, embellishing every detail. "So the water was, like, 10 feet high." "It was not," Anna said dryly from across the table. "And Claire saved us," the younger boy insisted, his voice full of admiration. Claire felt her face heat. "We all saved each other. No heroes here." Elias, sitting at the head of the table, caught her eye. "I can think of one." She looked down quickly, her heart fluttering. After lunch, while the kids cleaned up, Claire stepped outside to get some air. The sun was bright, warming her damp hair and drying her boots. She leaned against the porch railing, letting out a slow breath. She needed to make a decision. The job in the city waited for her. A life she'd carved out in her mind, neat, controlled, predictable. A life where no one depended on her too deeply, where she didn't have to face the ache of what she couldn't give. But the valley wasn't predictable. The Boone family wasn't neat. And Elias, he made her feel like she wasn't defined by her past. Like the broken pieces she carried weren't barriers but stories. Parts of her, not the whole of her. She wasn't sure if she deserved that kind of acceptance. The porch steps creaked. She turned to see Elias approaching, wiping his hands on a towel. "Kids are on dish duty," he said with a small smile. "Figured you'd need a break." She nodded, unsure how to respond. They stood quietly for a moment, the tension between them noticeable now, but not uncomfortable. More like a decision waiting to be made. Finally, Elias spoke softly. "You've been thinking hard all day." She exhaled. "Is it that obvious?" "Maybe just to me." Her throat tightened. I still don't know what to do about the job. You don't have to rush. They want an answer soon." He nodded slowly. "And what do you want?" The question settled heavy in the space between them. Claire looked out across the valley, the sunlight reflecting off the wet grass. She thought of the children's laughter, the warmth of the kitchen, the way Elias steadied her during the storm. She thought of the peace she felt here, the kind she hadn't felt in years. "I don't know how to choose," she whispered. "Then don't," he said simply. "Not yet." She looked at him, confused. "Sometimes," he continued, "life doesn't need choosing. Sometimes it shows you where you fit." Something in his voice cracked the final layer she'd been holding on to. She stepped toward him, her breath unsteady. "Elias," she said, "I'm scared of staying. I know. I'm scared of caring too much. I know that too. What if I disappoint you someday?" "You won't. What if I can't give you everything you deserve?" He shook his head gently. "Claire, what I deserve is someone honest, kind, and brave enough to show up when it matters. Last night proved you're all three." Her eyes filled unexpectedly, and she turned her face away, embarrassed. He stepped closer, his voice soft. "You don't need to be anything more than what you already are." She closed her eyes. "I don't want to run anymore." "Then don't." Breathing shakily, she opened her eyes. Elias watched her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Without thinking, guided by instinct more than courage, she reached for his hand. He took it gently, the warmth of his palm grounding her. They stood like that, the wind brushing past them, the valley stretching wide and quiet around them. And for the first time, Claire didn't feel like she was standing on the edge of a decision. She felt like she had already stepped into something new. Later that evening, after the day's work had settled into calm, Elias invited her out to the porch again. The sky was painted with warm colors, streaks of orange fading into violet. He held something in his hand, a small wooden box. Her breath caught. "Claire," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot these past weeks, and especially last night." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. Not flashy, not expensive, just meaningful. "I'm not asking for promises you're not ready to give," he said. "I'm asking if you want to share a life with us, with me. Not perfect, not easy, but honest and real." Claire's heart surged. All the doubts, all the fears, all the heavy truths she had carried for years, they suddenly felt smaller, lighter. "Elias?" Her voice trembled. Yes, I do." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands steady. From inside the house, a cheer erupted. Every single Boone kid had been pressed against the windows, watching the entire thing unfold. Claire laughed through tears as they burst out the front door, swarming her with hugs. That night, as she stood in the doorway watching Elias gather the sleepy children and herd them upstairs, she felt something settle softly into place inside her. A home, a family, a life she never thought she could have. And as she stepped into the warm light of the ranch house, she whispered to herself a truth she finally believed. "This is where I'm meant to stay." In the quiet heart of the valley, Claire and Elias proved that love isn't measured by perfect beginnings or flawless pasts, but by the courage to stay, the willingness to heal, and the choice to build a life with someone who sees you as enough. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to open your heart, you find that love was waiting for you all along. If you enjoyed this story and want more heartwarming Western romances filled with emotion, courage, and unforgettable characters, make sure you subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles. Don't miss the next ride into love, loss, and the spirit of the frontier, where every story is a journey worth taking. Hit that subscribe button now and saddle up for more.